We want to welcome you to another Lean Into Allyship event, this one titled The History of Pushback to Black Progress. And we want to give Dr. G as much time as possible for this event, but there's just a couple quick announcements that we want to give, just logistical things. So we have actually turned off the chat. So for those who are new to the series, we've turned off the chat, and it will, so Nehemiah will actually be sharing out resources for your reference throughout the entire event. But that said, we do ask that we want to make this as interactive as possible. So we want you to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to enter questions throughout the event. One thing we've noticed in past events is a lot of times we'll get halfway or 3/4 of the way through the event, and then a lot of questions come in. So we want to encourage you as soon as you have a question, the earlier you put it in, the more likely we are to get to it. We're still trying to find a way to get back onto some of the unanswered questions, and that actually informs future events as well. The other thing is that if you're returning, you've heard us advocate for this in the past, but we really strongly ask that you consider donating to Nehemiah. We cannot and do not expect Dr. G and his team to educate us for free on these monthly events. And then we also ask you to look to see if your company has a donation match, because again, that can help maximize the impact of your dollar. If you are new to the series, you're going to see a lot of, like I said, resources throughout this event. We will actually be sending out a recording with all of the references shared with you at the end of the event through a follow-up email from Justified Anger. So do not worry about writing it all down. In fact, we ask that you just listen, be present, and ask the questions, and we'll make sure that we get that information to you one way or another. And so with that, again, we want to encourage you to ask as many questions as you can. And so let's get started. And I want to introduce and bring Dr. G to the floor. He is the prime speaker tonight. So it is not a panelist group that we've seen in the past, and we're so excited. So for those who are new, Dr. G is the president, the founder, and the visionary for the nonprofit Nehemiah. And the vision for that organization is to engage the greater Madison community, to empower African-American individuals, families, and communities to bring about hope, transformation, and justice. And we are so honored to have Dr. G here tonight. He has 35 plus years of experience in this space, helping leaders all across the world. So we are extremely honored and humbled to have him here tonight to help educate us as would-be allies on this critical topic. So with that, Dr. G, welcome.
Daniel, thank you so much. It's great to be here again in this forum. I look forward to Lean Into the Allyship functions each month. And it's great to be working with you and others, Lauren and Samantha and AJ and others on the team, Don. And it's really great to be here. So thank you for all the work. I know you always speak so well of our organization, Dan, but kudos to you and your team for always lifting up the work of our organization. It means a lot to me, friend.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's an honor to be able to partner with you. So what we wanted to kick off with is just talking a little bit about critical race theory, or CRT. I know we have a video teed up, Dr. G. Do you want me to go right into the video, or do you want to briefly explain what it is? And I think the video covers that. So do you want me to, what would be the best way?
Let me just say something and then we'll tee it up. I think it's a short clip, maybe only about 5 to 7 minutes. But it's a discussion with Dr. Gloria Ladson Billings, world-renowned educator who's from our own community. Sorry, I've got a window that's open. So if you hear too much background of storm sounds, let me know, Daniel, and I'll shut it down. But I asked her to come and I asked her to come and talk with me on my podcast to get a sense of why is everyone giving this a name? Like, this is U.S. Black history. This is American history. Why are we now calling it a name like it's something new and devilish and destructive and divisive? And she gave me some really good feedback. So in essence, there's a lot of progress that's happening. And when progress has happened for disenfranchised people, but I'll just say specifically for the discussion tonight for Black people, there's systemic and strategized pushback. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in my talk, but there is pushback because of fear of the progress that's taking place. And the reason I love history is that these textbooks weren't written by Black people. Black people weren't keeping track of the amount or the numbers of Africans that were being taken from Africa. They weren't writing accounts of young girls being raped and families being broken up. This is what slave traders and slave owners and slave masters were describing. Black people were not writing books saying that holes were being dug in the ground so that a pregnant woman could lay her bare stomach in it so she could still be paddled for being naughty, but not injuring that child, which was a future slave. And so we know these things because very bold and brazen white people wrote about what they did to slaves. The Native Americans did not write about what happened to them. White people did. So I want to remind us, I don't have any time in my life to just really pounce on the propaganda train. I believe in contextualizing history so we don't repeat it. That's what I care about. I don't want history repeated. It does no good for me to try to get white people in a corner and to explain to them that they are descendants of slave owners, because most white people are not, because most white people were not slave owners. But I do believe in the impact of such systems in making creating advantages for people of European descent. And so what I think we could do, Dan, is just show this small clip. There'll be a link later about how to listen to Black Like Me. But I love Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings. I'm so proud to have her on the show. But let's just listen to this, and this will just tee up what it is I want to talk about.
Some of my questions, just in the simplest terms possible for just folks who are listening, for myself. How do you define critical race theory? Because our listeners are hearing this and they want to know how to be ready and appropriate in their response. Well, and so how do we define that?
Sure. Let me just first start by giving you a little bit of a context. And that is, yes, the first article that I wrote on critical race theory was published in 1995. So we're talking 26 years ago. So
wow.
this
is not new.
Recent phenomenon, and I'm late, right? I'm late because I come in education. The scholars who have done the work in law are almost 40 years. I mean, they're certainly at least 35 years of doing this work. But I define it as a theoretical framework for explaining racial disparity. Now, someone might ask, well, why do you need that? We've always had a way to explain the disparity. From 1619 to the mid-20th century, the explanation has been biological or genetic. In other words, Black people are just not as good. You know, something's wrong with them. Their brains are not as good. Everything about them is less than that. We even had a whole field known as eugenics that explains the notion that this group is better than that group. By the mid 20th century, we start moving towards what I would call the equal opportunity explanation. But the reason that Black people don't have what white folks have, the reason why there are disparities is that Black people lack equal opportunities. But it turns out that every time we offer an equal opportunity, we roll it back. So we have the Brown decision, that's an equal opportunity, separate is not equal. But then you start having cases in the Nixon administration, whether it's Milliken, whether it's Rodriguez, just a bunch of cases eating away at that. We had the Voting Rights Act. What's happening now? It's being rolled back. We had the Civil Rights Act being rolled back. We had affirmative action. Each of these gets rolled back. What critical race theory says is, no, the reason the disparities exist is because there is something baked into our system that makes things unequal over and over again. So that's very different from saying that my white neighbor is doing X to me. That's not what it's saying. What it's saying is, when I go into the bank and when my white neighbor goes into the bank, we're going to be treated differently in terms of whether or not, who gets the loan, maybe what the conditions might be. And I give people a very concrete example. My father came out of World War II And like many GIs, he wanted to buy a house for his family. Houses at that time were going at about $8,000. So you know, it's been a long time ago. Right. His white peers came out wanting to do the same thing and bought their homes in what was then becoming known as Levittown. So there's a Levittown outside of New York in Nassau County. There's a Levittown outside of Philadelphia. The clause in the covenants of Levittown, clause 25, reads as following: no person other than someone of the Caucasian race may purchase, lease, or live in a Levitt house. So my dad could not, even though he had the money, he couldn't get a Levittown house. His white peers could. They both served the nation. They both were World War II. Now you might say, well, that was back then. True. $8,000, $60 a month in mortgage. In some ways that sounds equal. Here's the real catch though, Dr. G. Today, the home that my father purchased is worth about $93,000. That Levitt home is worth $565,000. So you want to talk about wealth accumulation?
Yes, yes.
You know, so that's what critical race theory gets at. It wasn't that the individual GI was racist. It's that the system that they're both going into prohibited my father from even purchasing a home that would allow him to accumulate wealth at the same rate as that person. So that's what we're trying to get people to understand: systems of racism, systems of discrimination that are baked in. It's not about pointing a finger saying, oh, you did this, or you should feel guilty about that. Guilt is a pretty useless emotion, quite frankly.
Right.
What we want people to see is the way things are organized that continue to place Black folks sort of one down in every circumstance. We also want them to understand that it's important for us to be able to tell our stories. So one of the tenets of critical race theory is what's called the counter storytelling. That yes, you have this story, but let us tell you this other story that explains it differently. And we're never asking anybody, oh, just accept critical race theory whole cloth. We want you to interrogate it like you would any theory. And finally, I just want to be clear, nobody in PK-12 is teaching anything around critical race theory. So the arguments that we are seeing in town hall meetings and in school board meetings are spurious. Most K-12 teachers don't really even understand the theory. And why should they? Since it's typically taught in law school or graduate school. So, you know, I was a history teacher, so I'm always looking across the broad swath of things.
Right.
I can take you back to the 1700s to Shays' Rebellion, and you see a pattern of when white folks don't get what they want, they're not afraid to react in ways that are violent. So Shays' Rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion, the Wilmington coup, the Red Summer, all the way leading up to Tulsa, is a pattern of behavior that says we are entitled to have what we want, when we want it, how we want it. And so January 6th for me is not an anomaly.
Okay, excellent. That is such an impactful clip of such a great episode with Dr. Ladson Billings. And if you haven't yet listened to this full episode, which was the finale episode, I believe, of Black Like Me's season 5 this year, we highly, highly recommend that you do so. Another great listen relevant to tonight's conversation will be the episode prior to that one, which was a relevant redrop from a while back featuring 2 collaborators and friends of Dr. G's who are Black history professors at UW-Madison. listen. So just putting those two out there. If you are here tonight looking for homework, add these to your list. But Dr. G, with the basic understanding that we just listened to, can you spend a little time talking with us about the even larger issue, which is a pattern or patterns that have continued throughout history that support this conversation?
Sure. First of all, what I love about academicians, particularly ones of the ilk of Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, is that she can take something that's very complex and simplify it so that we can discuss it. What's happening is that critical race theory, and when you take something like that and you reduce it to initials, CRT, it sounds like HPV or HIV. It makes it sound like it's something very ominous and very dangerous. And so most people can't even describe what it is. They know that it's bad because it's making white people feel badly about themselves. So I love the fact that she's simplifying it. But in essence, what she's really talking about, she's giving a historic litany of ways in which progress and advancement of Black people and other marginalized people have experienced pushback. And so what I want people to do who are listeners is to not spend so much time understanding how to argue the tenets of critical race theory. I want you to understand the tenets of it. And so there's this pushback to stop the teaching of US Black history, of the role of whites, historic role, because progress is taking place and people in leadership don't want us to understand that we're repeating something that's happening. And so we have a very, I almost said rich, but a very deep history, Samantha and Daniel, about the mistreatment of others. But we think talking about it is horrible. And so I think about my daughter, hates loud sounds. She was in an incubator for several months because she was a preemie. So she's always been traumatized by loud noises because the first 100 days of her life was really governed by buzzers, connected to her navel and her heel. So she still doesn't like that stuff. But I remember the first time she heard a tornado warning sign. We might hear one of those tonight. But the first time she heard a tornado warning sign, she had gone outside. I remember it was Mother's Day. Some friends had taken her out to hang out while I hung out at home with my wife. And I remember she was at the front door banging. She was traumatized. Now, I'm not sure if she even knew what a tornado was, but the sound was so frightening that she needed the sound to stop because the sound was more of a threat than anything a severe storm could bring. So in order to make my daughter feel better, do I tell her to ignore severe warning signals? Do I write a petition to stop them? Do I say, hey, my daughter has been traumatized enough in her young life. Please stop sounding those alarms when we think that there's going to be a tornado touchdown. No, it's to put fear in you so that you respond to the imminent danger and protect yourselves. What we're doing is we're heading into stormy times. And rather than letting the alarms of our history sound so that we don't repeat them, we're trying to illegalize the signals. We're trying to say, let's stop talking about it. Let's stop looking back at this so that we don't know that they've happened. Samantha, were it not for history, we wouldn't know that the Civil Rights Act of 1966 was actually enacted in the 1860s. We act as if the Voter Registration Act, this great push, by Johnson and his administration and the civil rights leaders in my lifetime. Mm-hmm. Hell, the Constitution in its 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments gave Black people citizenship and the right to vote. 100 years before people had to march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, in order to get the rights to do this. Were it not for history, we wouldn't know that some of the gerrymandering and some of the strategies that are taking place to limit, if not hinder, the vote of marginalized people. If we didn't know that it had happened in the past, it wouldn't seem like it's so bad. When COVID broke out in Wisconsin last year, and Governor Evers wanted to postpone the election, went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, that party had a candidate who was the incumbent who didn't want it postponed. And he was running against Jill Karofsky. And I'm not here to promote a party. That's really not what this is about. Because if we just want to be completely frank, we've been wronged by white Republicans and Democrats. We just really want to tell the history. Everyone's got some responsibility. in this. And so, but the point is this, Milwaukee went from about 160, 170 polling sites to 8. Black people got COVID voting in Black communities. It seemed like it was just about COVID. It was just about the integrity of the election. We need to keep it going. It was an attempt to limit the Black vote. That didn't happen everywhere. That didn't happen in Brown Deer. That didn't happen in Whitefish Bay. But it happened in inner city Milwaukee to limit the votes and the people who are going to vote against the Republican candidate. And so we see these things, but if we didn't know history, we wouldn't know that these things are happening. Now, during our history class, Samantha, many of our white participants will say, oh my gosh, I've never heard this book. How could this not be in my history book? We are now seeing how it could not be in your history book. Because now that there's so much awareness, we've seen 12 Years Slave, we've seen Roots, we've seen the Underground Railroad, which is a Netflix or Amazon movie, and so on and so on. People are seeing it. We're talking about the 13th, how our own Constitution states that slavery is completely illegal unless you are incarcerated. Now that this is becoming readily accessible and people have it, it's becoming illegal to talk about it. And so it started by Trump saying federally funded organizations or organizations that receive federal funding, which makes it federally funded, could jeopardize its funding if you're teaching these tenets. So by telling or recounting history, not making up history, not if we're going to make up history, we would say every white person was a slave owner, that newborn babies were given their own baby slaves, and toddlers were given a toddler slave. Like, we would make the story ugly and egregious if we're going to make it up. We would not say a small percentage of white people were actually slave owners. That's what we wouldn't say that if that were the case. We're telling the facts. And so, Samantha, as I'm looking at this, we're seeing progress. You saw the election of Barack Obama, the re-election of Barack Obama was not a fluke. It was not an accident. It was not just white guilt. We saw America vote this man in again. Black people thought, and many others, either he's going to be assassinated or there's going to be a huge backlash. No one imagined the backlash of the Trump administration and its assault on civil rights and people of color and women and other. No one really saw that coming as brazen and bold as it was. I know I'm going on and on and on, but I just want to state that it makes me ask, what the hell is going on? And so what I realize is progress is going on. And we now know that these things have happened. We can now access it on smartphones and computers and classes. And now people are wanting to call it timeout. So when I look back over history, Samantha, I realize this is a call for the status quo. The advancement is taking place. Nothing against white men who are on this call, but there's a fear that in your lifetime or the lifetime of your children, you will be the ethnic minorities. And it's scaring the shit out of folks. Because the thought is, if they outnumber us, they're going to do to us what we did for them. We've had 400 years to do to white people what they've done to us. And we haven't wanted to do that. Some of us have. But by and large, that's not been our strategy because we don't want to be dehumanized. We don't want to stoop to that low of raping babies and killing women and breaking up families and selling them down the road for a profit as chattel property. We haven't wanted to do that. We just want the same America that brought our white colleagues from Europe for better opportunity. And so what's happened is that we just look at history for just a moment, Samantha, what we realize is this is very interesting. I just did some research and the KKK threatened poor whites. You know, these free slaves are going to want to come in and get your land. They're going to compete against you in the market. And they might want to marry and sleep with your white women and your daughters. So you need to really watch what's going on. And so you would think slavery started in 1619, and so maybe the KKK started in, 1620. The KKK was formed in 1865. Same year as Juneteenth celebration. Same year that the United States ratifies the freedom. Like it was suggested in the Civil War. But the year in which it was actually ratified was 1865. Then the KKK starts, Well, because when Black people were chattel property, you weren't going to let a band of unlawful people kill your slaves because that was your property any more than you let somebody shoot your dog or your car. But when that Black person is no longer my property and they want to buy a house next door, and I know they can pick more cotton than me, I know they can milk more cows than me, I know this, well, hell, let it ride. So then all of a sudden the KKK comes along, starts killing and hanging Black people who are a threat to white success. It was in direct result. Come on, we've been here since 1619, and the KKK starts in 1865. I mean, what is that? 16, 19, 17, 19, 18, 19, 100? Like 250 years. You don't like Black people. You wait 250 years because now they're not chattel property. They are a threat. And so what's happened is then when Black people started voting, because the Constitution and the amendments gave them the right, you then see the birth of the poll tax, the literacy test. That opening scene in Selma, when the character played by Oprah was asked, how many counties are there in Alabama? And she answers 72. And the guy says, name them. She could have said A, B, C, D, E, because he didn't know. He didn't know what, he couldn't name them all, but he could demand that she did before she voted. Grandfather clause. These are all pushback, the creation of the movie Birth of a Nation. Just a couple of more, Samantha, because I've just been thinking about this.
Yeah.
When Blacks were freed and were fed up and decided to go north through northern migration and beginning of like 1916, you then see through like the early 1930s, Blacks are becoming prosperous in the north. Not all of them, but a lot are. They're finding jobs in factories or at least more control of their lives. There still was racism in the north. You see things like the Tulsa Massacre that happens in 1921. So Black people are going north and creating culture and making New York famous, creating the first true American art form, jazz. But for the Blacks who remained in the South, like in Oklahoma, they were owning libraries. We were owning cafes and bookstores and shops and boutiques and businesses. And so for there to be a police endorsed attack, police officers authorized the citizens of Greenwood to take up arms and to kill Black people. That level of wealth has never been recovered by the general population. You get the movie stars and the Denzels and the Oprahs and the LeBron James, but not as concentrated as it was and rooted in history. When slaves were freed, there were rules that said they cannot own guns. Because in Virginian law, I said, you get a Black man on a train with some mean whiskey, there's going to be a shooting. But yet the NRA is created in 1871. It just allows white people just to have guns for sports and guns for entertainment and guns for protection. So as you see Black progress, vagrancy laws were created. So if Black people couldn't get jobs, they were put in jail, and you could work it off by working for free for your former slave owner. At one point in time, 20% of the state of Alabama's revenue was directly attributed to dollars from vagrancy laws. That the free labor that white farmers got because of Black people who were incarcerated because they didn't have jobs, so they were vagrants, accounted for 20% of the state government. Well, after all, the Constitution says slavery is illegal unless you are incarcerated. So I'm going to pause there because I'll probably relate to some of the other stats, but it turns my stomach. So when I look at what's happening with, first of all, giving us a name, like what other segment of our history is called an initial, like is the Vietnam War conflict called that? What about suffrage for women? We're going to change that. We're going to call that the conflict. Are we going to call that PMSing? Like how are we going to reconfigure what we did to women and not allowing them to vote? Because the Constitution said you got to be male and own land. So how is an unmarried woman going to own land? And could men even bequeath land? So are we going to start picking and choosing history? For me, when you start taking history away, it says to me, hold on, because they're about to repeat something. But let's change it so folks don't know what's going on. So I'm sorry, I went on a long time there, but I want folks to understand the pushback is not unprecedented. This is what happens when Black progress takes place. And so rather than just understanding, is it good or is it bad? It is talking about the systemic impact of illegal practices that were winked at so that you could still carry them out. And you'd be crazy to think that those things don't have an impact today. Mm-hmm. White men marched in Charlottesville, or they marched because of statues being taken down. I think it was in Charlottesville, because many of them felt that 60 years of affirmative action has destroyed the country, but 400 years of slavery hasn't. Let's just let bygones be bygones. Giving Black people food tickets and bus passes and housing subsidy has ruined this nation. So we need to understand what we're up against. It used to be just a matter of history that was just sort of not put in your textbooks. These folks are doing it right in front of our faces, because we don't know what it is, and they're changing stuff and doing stuff, and it's frightening to me.
It makes me think too, I know you've talked about this on here in Lean Into Allyship and on your podcast as well, but even in places where support and subsidies are given, the fight and the loopholes that oftentimes the Black community has to go through in order to reach and earn that support is so far different and so skewed, from what a white person has to go through. I know I'm looking through here. I know Dan has lost power and got cut off the call. So he might be joining us. We shall see. But you gave us some really, really excellent examples, historical examples, right, of Black progress being met with strong resistance. And I know you talked about in this beginning as well. And I do want to revisit this because you have dug into this many times. I know here in our conversations and on your podcast as well. I think you opened season 5 with this concept and this reminder. But just in preparation for this event, you talked with us again about how white progressives can actually cause more challenges in this context, often than any other groups. And I'm hoping that you can just help elaborate on that, because I do think that is just such an important regrounding that we always visit along the way.
Sure. And I know, I'll be honest, Samantha, that sometimes I can say that I talk about white progressives with sweeping generalities. But what I mean is soft words and contemplative speech without knowledge is not useful. What makes all of this so explosive is that if people don't know history, they're just thinking, no, this can't be that. Like these voting laws, these things that are changing, they're saying that it's to give people more access. You mean the people that just voted a particular administration out? So now that the party wants to have more of us vote? Really? That makes sense to us? Like that's what's really happening. And so for me, it's not just enough to say I care about what's happening to people, but not engage in the issues, not understand the issues, not affiliate to be a part of changing the issues. That's what I need people to do. I don't need people just to tear up when they read or when they watch 12 Years a Slave. I need them to understand that some of these policies are so diabolical, Samantha, that it's not like the average white person gets up and just says, I'm going to be a mean SOB. Because it's so much a part of the system, you just think it's what you do. When you believe that certain people are inferior, certain genders are inferior, when you begin to think some of these things, it's easy to act upon it without even saying, I'm trying to hold this particular group down. People really feel like, I'm just trying to be American. And so I just feel what I want people to do is to not just demonize another party while doing nothing. What differentiates you from the folks that are illegalizing CRT? Are you reading up on it yourself? Are you registering for our US Black History course? Are you talking about it with friends? Because to fix this, white progressives have got to do more than talk about white conservatives. What are you doing to make the situation better? Who do you know who's different? How do you handle history? Because it's real to me every day. This isn't something I do in February. It's not something I do when another Black person is shot. This is a reality, and I don't focus on it to get stuck. It doesn't help me to get stuck, but I've got to help because my people of color understand this and they believe it. But for those who want to come from on the journey and be a part of the solution, need to understand what the true struggle is. So when there are hearings about the role of US history in its fullness, we know that people are going to show up who don't want it, but do the people who believe that it's useful, do they show up? And let's just say they do illegalize it. Can parents buy books for their children? Can they help facilitate play dates for Black children? Can they talk to their children about history? And not in a way that's destructive any more than the Boston Tea Party or the American Revolution or things that we did to free ourselves from the British Crown or the Vatican. We didn't think that those things were destructive. When I was in the second grade at Lapham School in 1970 here in Madison, my teacher, Mrs. Carls, told me I was a descendant of a slave, and that whole room of white kids. Nobody worried about how that traumatized me. But when I got home, and Samantha, you've heard me say this story, my mother saw something in my eyes and said, "Baby, what's wrong?" And I asked, "Mom, were we really slaves?" Because my first grade teacher in an all-Black class in Chicago told me I was going to be the first Black president. We talked about science, and she talked to me about air raid drills. That's before your time, Samantha. We used to hide under our desk because there was a threat of the Cold War. We talked about scary stuff, but nowhere did she think that it was important for me to know that I had descended from enslaved people. My first few weeks in second grade in Madison, Wisconsin, that's their lecture. That's in their history program. Someone at MMSD thought that second graders should learn that Black people were slaves. And now we're afraid of white children learning that Black people were enslaved because no one worried about me and my mental health when I had to come home and process that. So it's very interesting about how that same subject matter seems to be divisive and harmful. But when it was shared with me, and when I went through school in Madison, cringing at the slave unit or the slave chapter every year, no one worried about that impact. Yet meanwhile, Madison saying, Black kids are losing interest in school around the third or the fourth grade. You know what? It must be reading. It's those single mothers, like Daniel Moynihan said in the 60s in his Moynihan report. It must be that ghettoization and that urban life that's kind of chewing them up, and they're too busy trying to read and eat and fight rats and prostitution and pimps in their homes, not thinking that the poison that they were feeding us about who we were and what we amount to and what we contributed. And if we were going to tell history of Black people, why did it stop at slavery? Why did it not stop at the 16 men who were elected into Congress? And why didn't it go through what Black people did in building historically Black colleges and universities and sororities and fraternities and the Harlem Renaissance? Why was it so rooted in slavery and chains? And then Abraham Lincoln, a white man, freed us because he had the right heart and said, this is wrong. That's not what he did. It's not why he did it. It's not how it happened, but yet no one thought that that was damaging to Black and white people to twist history that way. I just want people to wake up and understand, if you don't open your eyes, and if you don't learn history, you will be a part of it repeating itself. And that's not Republicans' fault. If you can read, you can engage.
Sorry, I was on mute there for a second. Thank you for all of that. A statement that really stood out to Dan and I as we were prepping, and something we've really been thinking about is asking ourselves, acknowledging that we as non-Black would-be allies, we can take being an ally on as a hobby, right? That is part of our privilege. That's part of our kind of opt-in or opt-out of the work that we do in allyship. So really, we wanted to pose that as a question, right, to everyone here today. What is your buy-in level? What is your buy-in level? Is it hobby status? Something that we have talked about too, I know within our group, is really taking your commitment beyond. Dr. G, you always teach us about educating, donating, and affiliating, right? And this series is hopefully about all of those three things, right? And we hope to integrate opportunities and learnings and recommendations for all three of those, but really making sure that you are going beyond the education piece and truly affiliating and truly donating, and just walking the walk as much as you speak it.
Definitely.
So,
Lives depend on it, Samantha. That's a great question.
Okay, so I think that we would love to jump into the Q&A because we're at about 7:45 already, which time always goes so fast, but I want to make sure to get to some of the Q&A. One of the strong themes is around schools only having so much time, the acknowledgement around that, and how do they prioritize and figure out what to leave out and keep in?
You know, I guess we're talking, Samantha, about what grade level, or like you heard Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings said, come on, at the K to 12 level, teachers aren't really even talking about this because they don't understand it. This is typically left to legal experts and graduate students, academicians and legal minds. So here's the thing, we're teaching history. Of all the things we're chucking, we are not throwing out history. I remember in high school learning about the New Deal, but what I didn't learn was that before FDR got it passed, they pulled out the qualification of field hands and domestics who didn't get Social Security, who didn't get unemployment, didn't get retirement. And the white lawmakers said, we will approve your New Deal because you're trying to put the country back together. You know, you're trying to create the FDIC and Farm Aid and all these things, but we're not going to approve it if we're going to be spending money giving retirement to these N-words who used to be slaves and now they're just field hands and domestics. Completely cut Black people out of Social Security. And it's freaking called a New Deal. Hell no, it's the same old deal. It's just new covering. And so if we're looking at the proliferation of slavery, and I mean, the proliferation of racial disparity and the preponderance of white supremacy and how it has infiltrated every facet of society, wouldn't you want your children to not be groomed for that level of terrorism? So my point is, I'm not saying get rid of algebra, but I'm saying if we're going to talk about the New Deal, let's talk about the New Deal. If we're going to talk about World War I, let's talk about Black people who fought in it, like my family, World War II. But let's talk about the fact that when Black people came home, they couldn't get home loans or FHAs. So I'm just saying, tell the whole damn history. We're not saying what you put, just tell, if you're going to talk about the New Deal, talk about the New Deal. It screwed Black people. And the New Deal was designed to help poor people. Who was poorer in America than folks like Black people who are field hands? So my thing is, it's not a matter of time. It is a matter of control. Don't play with me. This is not a matter of, there's so little time. And we're watching a level of assault on people of color and Black people that we haven't seen since like the 30s and the 40s. Don't we think that somebody needs to understand how kids arrive at this point? The parents are saying it's not me. Television is saying it's not. Who's doing it? Who's modeling this? Who's teaching these kids that it's their country and we're taking it from them? Because you know what? In 1865, that's what the KKK told poor white people. These Black folks are going to take your land and your women and your corn and your cotton. Do you want these people going to school with your kids so we have separate but equal? Do you want these people living with you and by you? There goes the neighborhood. So they move to the suburbs. What happens is those in power have frightened the white community that was the closest to Black advancement. So the low folks in the white totem pole could say, but at least I ain't Black. And when they bump up against Black people who can read, who can add, who can start businesses, who can run farms, Black people weren't replacing white doctors and attorneys, and well, we were, but not in large numbers. The poor whites, the poor rural whites were frightened because they're like, they're going to get you. They're going to catch up. So you have to carry out these laws and you have to be the torchbearer, because when they come across the fence, they're going to get you first. If we don't teach people how we got here, why do we think your children and grandchildren are going to be any different? Because we're telling our children what happened so that they can avoid it. You go to college, you be there first, you work hardest. I was told I went to college, sit in the front row, raise your hand, go to every office hours, because there's going to be 6 of you in a class of 600. So the professor's going to know when you're not there. And so I did what they told me to do because I knew what I was up against. If white people don't push for this, their children are being groomed to be racist, to be elitist, to be sexist, and to perpetuate the legacy of these frightened young boys who grew into frightened men who have raped and stolen and killed for the sake of faith, nation, America, mom, apple pie. And someone's got to say enough this is not going to happen to my child. And so we need to make some kind of time, or every parent is going to have to take it on. But I'm concerned about white children because Black children are being taught for 400 years how to survive this history. So we're going to tell it. I don't know if white people are.
Yes. I think another question that goes along with that I would love for us to cover, there are a few asking about how critical race theory might relate to communism and Marxism, if at all. And I think I know obviously that's a little bit of a hot button association, but it's definitely out there. So if we want to at least address it.
Sure. I would say this. First of all, that's all embedding fear in people. Mm-hmm. So now it's called critical race theory. Let's just say for a moment, it's US history. What does US history have to do with communism? And wait, first of all, let me just say, how do we know communism is bad? How do we know Marxism is bad? Oh, history tells us, history books. So now the same books that told us, don't be communist, America, those same books that talked about slavery, that's illegalized. So then take away the history of communism, they won't be afraid of it. You're afraid of communism, and I'm not a communist, but people are afraid of it because they were told this is bad. What happened was during the Cold War, when there was a threat of the USSR coming against America, it mocked the US because it says, you're judging us as communists and socialists. You can't even treat your own US born Black people fairly. The US said, oh shit, the world is talking about how we're treating Black people. So let's invite one or two up to the White House. Let's do this. Let's help them. Let's support them. And so when America was on the hot seat, America said, we've got to make some concessions because we can't challenge communism if the perception is that we don't know how to take care of Black people. So part of it was the communists shamed the US about the treatment of us. The other thing is some of the communism countries welcomed our novelists, they welcomed our thought leaders, they welcomed our academicians, and they acknowledged their humanity. Now, we said that was anti-American, and communism most likely was, but you know what else was anti-American? Raping Black children, raping Black women, beating our men in the street, doing what was done to Emmett Till. Does history tell us that that's what communists do? Is that the fear of Marxism, that it will rape our women, that it will shoot our men in the street, that it will put our men our babies in? Is that the fear of Marxism? And no, it makes us anti-American. It makes us anti-God or what have you. Those communities were more welcoming to the plight of Black people. Now, without them doing that, Samantha, when Black people challenged what should have been American democracy, they were called communist. And so if you take a knee, we see it today, you take a knee. Colin Kaepernick asked people in the military, would this be disrespectful? That man never got up and said, screw America, screw his flag, that's not what he said. He just said, I'm not going to sing a song that promotes something that I don't have a right to. And I'm going to do it in American fashion, because what America is known for and its great dream and great land of liberty is its ability to protest peacefully. So if it's mean and if it's in the streets, then we're derelicts. If it's taking a knee, then we're anti-American and we're selfish, SOBs or bastards, whatever it is Trump called us. If we raise our fist on the platform in the 68 Olympics or in the 2021 Olympics, then we're ingrates and our medal should be strapped. But you can shoot and kill a Black person on camera and you're within your line of duty. You can fire someone. You can get rid of affirmative action after strategically keeping Black people out of companies and universities. Like, how crazy do you have to be to not see these patterns? Mm-hmm. And so my point is this: we're American citizens and have been for almost half a millennium. Treat us right so that communism and socialism isn't attractive to Black people. But let's not begin associating CRT. It's history, folks. It is history. Let's stop calling it CRT, connecting it to communism, scaring the bejeebus out of people so that they don't want to support it. That's how they win. Mm-hmm. If it's any more than US history, then of course you're going to be frightened. But are we afraid of any other? So our treatment of women, does that make us Marxist? Our treatment of the Native Americans, is that going to make us Marxist? And so now there's this fear that even if you're not a Colin Kaepernick, if you teach a course like I do, if you stand for what I stand for, I want to see us learn from history so that we can move ahead together. I am now a threat to American democracy, I bet you I have as much Black patriotism and Black vets in my family as the average white person on this call. My uncles, my grandfathers, my great uncles who fought and still never lived in the America they fought for. In the America they fought for. And we get called communists because I want the rights for what my uncles fought for, what my grandfather. How absurd, how wrong is that to call the descendants of these Black Americans communists because we want a slice of the damn apple pie that we give to the whole world, but yet we have worked for it and made America a super world power, and we are communists because we want equality. That's just absurd and it's wrong, but that's where we are.
Is where we are, and that's why we're having this conversation, right? So we can all be more informed and go out and move forward, with education that we need. I think as a final question, Dr. G, to wrap up this theme, and then we'll move into some updates and some awesome news through Nehemiah and Justified Anger. But I think if there would be your response to the request where we received your question, is there an appropriate way to respond to the statement that liberal theology is trying to make white children feel guilty about being white? And we know that that is a strong, statement and narrative against the teaching of CRT, and just just your response to that briefly in a minute or so, and any guidance you would give on that.
It's first of all, it's bull crap, because U.S. history is not being taught to little children. Now, the other thing is, if America doesn't want little children to be traumatized, then America should stop having a traumatizing history. Then let's stop raping and killing people and forcing people to work on railroads and to sell us their land and sending their children out of the country to schools to become more anglicized. If we don't want white children to be traumatized by the teaching of how white people traumatize the world, then stop traumatizing. And then we have no history to share. Then let's talk about how we made the world a better place. We really did have this sense of come all ye that are weary, and I'm showing a lack of my civic knowledge. The statement that's on the Statue of Liberty. Let's stop demonizing the teaching of our history, because the wrong is not talking about it. The wrong is that it was done, and America has still not acknowledged it. That's what concerns me, Samantha. We're still not acknowledging it. So what I would say to people is, if you don't want to repeat history, then open your eyes. And we're at a point where they're messing with our history, they're messing with our voting, mass incarceration is off the hook. These are things that happened 100 years ago. And if we don't understand it, it's not going to seem bad. And it's like the old adage that if you try to boil a frog and you put it in boiling water, it'll jump out. But if you just inch it up a degree at a time, it doesn't know. We're simmering and don't even know what's going on. We're trying to sound the alarm. And while we are, they're like, don't listen to him. He's trying to make white people feel bad. Don't listen to him. He's a communist. And listen, guilty white people have never helped me or the Black cause. Informed, empowered white people who have understood what time it is, who have used their ability to be a part of change. They're my brothers and they're my family. They're the ones helping to make a change. You couldn't pay me to want to make a young white kid feel guilt-ridden. How does that help me or my child? But I want their parents to be enlightened, because we're worrying about them feeling guilty. But if they are oblivious to the truth, they will be pawns in the hands of those in leadership to repeat a history that's going to damn this nation.
Thank you for that. I would also love, just kind of in wrap up, to boost a statement, a quote that you referenced in one of your episodes I was actually listening to just the other day that I felt like was so appropriate for this. You talked about James Baldwin and something he had said in The New Yorker about what white people do not know about Black people is what they do not know about themselves. And so for us to not be willing to learn about the history that brought all of us here is refusing ourselves and everyone around us. So thank you so much for all of that.
Samantha, I want us to work together. There's a group of folks who believe that we can change this together. So again, my idea is not to make white people feel badly about themselves, because folks who do that never do any good. They become progressive. So they talk about, I'm white, I'm scum, but never do anything. That's not what I want. I want folks to understand I'm white I have some privilege. This country has given me some. Doesn't mean I'm rich, doesn't mean I have everything, but I have some leverage. I want to use it for a fairer tomorrow for everyone. So I want people to know I'm on this call talking to predominantly white people because I believe, or non-Black people, because I believe we can make a difference together. So please, let's not let it be said that we're trying to be divisive. We must tell the truth to move ahead. Let's seize this moment. And this is why we need people to understand this and continue to support our work, because the very thing that we're doing that's building allies is now being seen as a threat and un-American. That's a serious accusation to silence someone like me.
Absolutely. Yes, I know Dan and I in our early conversations, and still, every time we talk now, and I certainly hope for everyone that's joining with us on the call tonight in your would-be ally development and efforts, really, like, history is maybe not our direct accountability, but it is absolutely our direct responsibility to work through and acknowledge and learn and unlearn. And for us, that is why Lean Into Allyship is so important and such a passion project and, deep commitment for us. It has become such an integrated part of, of who we are and what we do. And we love hearing and knowing that for so many of you that have been along with us for a year plus, that you are doing that same work. And always, Dr. G, for your leadership and education along the way. We could not do it without you. We couldn't do it without Nehemiah and Justified Anger and your incredible team. So I wanted to just make sure to pass things over to RCA to pop in. She's our Director of Mobilization at Nehemiah, and she's going to highlight a few of the excellent and impactful education and volunteer opportunities coming up, along with an exciting new offer.
Thank you so much, Samantha. I'm excited to be here with you all tonight and give you an update on everything that's going on at Nehemiah right now, things that you can engage in as allies. Sorry, I meant to press the present button, but the Zoom controls were on top of it. We're going to unshare here for a second. Do it again. Oh no. Is there anyone else on the team that might be able to pop the slides up?
I think I can. Give me just a sec.
Thank you so much, Samantha. Yeah. I'm also working on reopening them in the event that you can't.
I feel like Dan might owe us all a drink for his technical issue this evening. Okay, let me see it.
I'm back up.
Oh, you are? Okay.
There we go. Awesome. Thanks for hanging in there with me through that. Now it's loading. Okay. So we always talk about the 3 pillars. We talk about education, donation, and affiliation with Nehemiah. With the educate pillar, what we need you to be in the know about right now is that we have an upcoming conference on reentry and how COVID has affected our understanding of the way that prisons and jail systems operate. You are welcome to join us for that on September 15th. As always, our third Thursdays are packed with informational materials for you. We have our reentry lunch and learns that happen at noon. And then we also have White and Wondering, and the topic there will be CRT once again. So if this is something that you'd like to engage in conversation with other allies about, exchanging knowledge or exchanging just thoughts and wonderings, you're welcome to join us for that as well. We'll make sure that you have links for registration for those events in your follow-up email. But also, the thing you've all been waiting for, the Black History for a New Day registration is up and ready for you to begin tonight. We are launching that right now at LIA. Very exciting. We're going to provide you with a link to register as an individual. And if you'd like to register as a group, maybe with a work organization, a community group you're involved with, a faith community, any type of group wanting to take this course together, you can email me at justifiedanger@nehemiah.org, and I will help your group get set up for taking this course together. Here's a beautiful slide. It is a 9-week course. The cost is $300 per person, and it is taught by UW-Madison professors and Nehemiah staff. Everyone who I've heard talk about the course after the experience has just been blown away. Like Dr. G said, why hasn't this been taught to me before? So I really do encourage all of you to engage with this if you're able. In the donate pillar, we're still working toward our goal of achieving 1,000 sustaining donors, so sustaining us in solidarity. If that's something that you're able to do, any amount makes a difference toward that goal. And last but not least, you can affiliate, you can work alongside us. You can take our volunteer survey that's available at nehemiah.org under the Join the Struggle portion. If you find the volunteer portion there, you'll be able to take a volunteer survey and put your personal skills into use. And then also you could become a small group discussion facilitator if you've already taken the Black History for a New Day course. The more discussion facilitators we have, the more people we can offer this course to. So your engagement in that way is really meaningful and amplifies our ability to tell these stories. And last but not least, you can invite a friend to join you at a Nehemiah event. You can invite a friend to White and Wondering, to lean into allyship, to take the Black History for a New Day course with you. Any of our events are open to you and all of those in your spheres of influence. Thanks, Samantha, for giving me some time to talk about those things, and we'll make sure you have links in your email tonight.
Oh, can you guys hear me? Amazing. Okay. Thank you so much, RCA. And I just also wanted to make sure to thank Don on the back end from the Nehemiah team, who is always keeping the content flowing and giving us so many great resources along the way. We wanted to clarify before everyone hops off, we thank you so much for sticking with us here a few minutes over, but we just wanted to clarify that the Lean Into Allyship series will typically always be offered on the 4th Tuesday of every month, with the exception here or there, including this session, which was kind of like our interim summer event. But we really would ask that you help us bolster the Nehemiah team and this work and their additional work and this series itself. And so with that in mind, Dr. G, we were hoping that you would be able to pop on and help us speak to the Ally in Action Challenge for this upcoming month, and just any closing remarks that you may have.
Sure. Just understand that history does bind us together, but it will also fuel us for a better future together. So let's not allow people to use divisive words to give us even more reason to not look at history together, to lean into each other, and to move forward together. Let's not get this confused with communism. I'm not asking people to be anti-American. I need people to be American and to lean into the ideals of this country, that everyone is equal, everyone has rights, everyone has access. We want that to be true for all of us. So please, whatever you've done to this point is not enough. We need to do more to make sure that we're leaving this society into better hands with our children. And so what we do and how we go about it will determine what our children inherit. This is an opportunity. This is our moment. We can't look back and criticize those in history. We can't look to Washington and criticize those who live in the White House. This is us. This is our community. This is our nation. This is our time. Let's do what we can together to make a difference. This is a chance for us to really be allies. Let's do it, or we're part of the problem. Support us.
Thank you for that. So support the great work. And for this event specifically, bring a friend with you to this work. Bring your friend along with you on this journey and this growth and this unlearning that you hopefully have here with Lean Into Allyship. So we would hope that for next month's event, you bring at least one friend with you. We would love to see maybe double our registration numbers, but most importantly, just double the dialogue and double the awareness. And so with that, we ask that you mark your calendars for our next event. Our first fall event kickoff will be Tuesday, September 28th, and the topic and additional details will be shared soon, but I think that we might be able to share the registration link in the chat right now, depending if that is ready, just to go ahead and get that on your calendar right away. If that does come through, please feel free to click in and get yourself all squared away and signed up. As always, we want to remind you that allyship is a verb, right? It is a journey, not a destination, and it is an action. It is a daily, consistent practice and action. And just like all things, it is a commitment and a growth that without consistent practice, right, cannot grow. So we thank you for being here and taking, this path along with us. We have so many thank yous, most specifically to Dr. G and Nehemiah and Justified Anger and your incredible team, and all that you all do with us in preparation for this event, and behind the scenes as well. So RCA, Don, Lauren from the Generator, we couldn't do this without the Generator's incredible technology. AJ, who's one of our co-volunteers that helps us put everything together. Just tons of thank yous and gratitude. Please watch for a follow-up email to come from Justified Anger, which will include a recap of this event and all of the resources that you've seen streaming through, because we know there was a lot to keep up with. So we will get that out to you as soon as we can. Thank you everyone so much. Enjoy the rest of your summer, and we can't wait to see you in September.